Okay, we are ready to start. 12:01. Welcome back. We are jumping into chapter 6. We've sort of been on the precipice between chapter 5 and chapter 6 and the bridge between the two stories. So technically, even though this is listed as the fourth shir of chapter 6, it's really the first. Because up until now, we've been dealing with the last issues in chapter 5, the Malach. Last week, we had a bit of a parenthetical shir about the concept of God's army and Hashem Tzvaot and the Malach of Sar Tzva Hashem and where else he appears in Tanakh. And if you missed that shir, it's a self-contained shir more or less, but you're welcome to go back to the video and take a listen or a look. And we are going to start now in chapter 6.
Where can we find the last week's shiur?
It should be, all the shiurim are always posted on the Torah in Motion website. Same
Okay.
page that has the registration and the source pages. It has all the previous shiurim recorded. It also links to a YouTube channel, so you could check it from YouTube. On the YouTube side, if you subscribe to the channel, you can find it. But yeah, they're always listed and posted there.
Okay, thank you.
So anytime if you miss, that's always an option. Just to resist the temptation to have everybody miss, because everybody wants to go and listen to the recorded version, and then I can pre-record and post, and we can pretend like we're back in the joke days of the tape recorder speaking to the tape recorder. Okay, let's jump in. We are starting in earnest. We are starting the rest of the story of chapter 6. So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully my computer will behave. Share screen. Okay. We'll get to the source page in a few minutes, but for now we are into I want to read through the chapter before, and we've done this many times, but I just want to remind everybody, my pedagogical perspective, I prefer to read through the text in the Tanakh, in this case the website with Tanakh in it, before we start to analyze too much and structure things. Just want to get a bird's eye view of the whole story. So we were talking about this Malach who communicates with Yehoshua at the end of chapter 5, and we've this in the end of chapter 5, this Sar Tzva Hashem, who says Atavati, I've come now, and our understanding of the phrase Atavati is that he's come now in the context of the Battle of Yericho. We've sort of taken or adopted the view of the Mefarshim who say that it is the Malach who continues the communication with Yehoshua, even though it says Vayomer Hashem el Yehoshua. This is the words of the Malach giving Yehoshua the battle plan for Yericho. Yericho was completely shut up, either because Israel had besieged it from the outside, or because Yericho was a walled city, and therefore they enclosed or closed that wall to prevent others from coming in. Vayomer Hashem el Yehoshua. Re'ei natati biyadcha et Yericho ve'et malka giborei Chayil. Says God to Yehoshua, parentheses via the Malach, behold, I have given Yericho into your hands, Yericho and its king, even the mighty warriors of Yericho. V'sabotem ta'ir kol anshe ha'milchama, circle the city, hakafa style, circle the city, you and all of the people of war, meaning all the soldiers. Hekifa ta'ir pamachat, go and surround the city, make a circuit around the city once, and that'll be per day. Kot taseh sheshit yamim, thus you shall do for 6 days. V'shiv'a kohanim yisu shiva shofrot hayovlim lifnei ha'aron. 7 priests, 7 shofarot, or ram's horns, yovel is a ram's horn, before the ark, surrounding the city, 1 hakafa, 1 circuit per day for 6 days. Uvayom hashvi'i tasobu et ta'ir sheva pamim. 7th day, 7 circuits, and v'akohanim yitku b'shofarot, let the kohanim blast their shofar. When that long blast of the shofar will sound, and you hear the sounds of the shofar, let the people shout a great shout. And the walls will simply collapse beneath themselves. And then the people can go in straight to the city and fight the war that needs to be fought in order to conquer the city. Yehoshua calls over the Kohanim who are going to carry the ark, and he says to them, Su'u et aron habrit, take up the ark. V'shiva Kohanim yisu shiva shofrot yovlim lifnei aron Hashem. 7 priests, 7 shofarot before the ark. Vayomer el ha'am, and he turns to the people and he says to them, V'sobu et ta'ir, to surround the city, make a circuit around the city. Ivru v'sobu et ta'ir, go and circle the city. Ve'chalutz yavo lifnei aron Hashem, and let the first ranks, the chalutzim, they are the front ranks. Who are the front ranks? We talked about this once before. The chalutzim in Sefer Yehoshua are the front lines of the army, which refers generally to the tribes of Reuven and Gad, who had agreed to go chalutzim lifnei ha'am as the first ranks before the people in the conquest of the city of the cities of Israel, in order to, before they would settle on the east bank of the Yarden. Chalutz yavo lifnei aron Hashem. So you have the chalutzim in the front, and you have the aron, you have the shofar, the kohanim behind blowing the shofar. Vahi ki amor Yehoshua la'am v'shiva kohanim nosim shiva shofot ha'yolim lifnei Hashem. Yehoshua, so it was. Yehoshua, as Yehoshua had said, he had 7 kohanim carrying 7 shofarot before God, meaning before the Aron. Avru v'taku b'shofarot, ve'aron brit Hashem holech achreihem, the Aron behind them. Ve'achalutz holech lifnei kohanim, the chalutzim before the kohanim went first. Tok'ei shofarot, ve'amasef holech achrei ha'aron, all the rear guard went after the ark. So you had the chalutzim first, then the kohanim, then the Aron, and then the rest of the camp. Haloch v'takua b'shofarot, blowing the shofar. ואת העם ציווה יהושע לאמור, לא תריעו ולא תשמיעו את קולכם ולא יצא מפיכם דבר. People were instructed by Yehoshua to be quiet, to be silent, not to cry out, not to speak, not to express any sound. Ad yom omri alechem ariu v'yariyotem, until I tell you. So the Aron went around the city once. And at the end of one circuit, first day, they went to sleep. They went back to the camp. Next morning, Yehoshua got up, takes the kohanim, takes the people. Circuit number 2, 7 kohanim, 7 shofars. They're blasting away. The Reuven and Gad before them. Exactly as on the first day, the Me'asef, the rear guard, after. They surrounded the city the second day. And thus the pattern was set, ko asu sheshet yamim, thus they did for 6 days. Vahi, b'yom hashvi'i, on the 7th day, they did exactly as they had done in the first 6 days, but this time they did it sheva pamim. Right? We do that every Simchas Torah, because our Simchas Torah is built on the model of the hakafot of the Mizbeach on Sukkot with the Arava, and that circuit, 1 per day until Shana Rabbah, when they do it 7 times, is built on the model of the Hakafot of Yericho. And so there's a direct connection. It just goes by its steps. 7 circuits, 7 times. On the 7th time, they blow the shofar. Yehoshua tells the people, cry out. God has given you this city. This city shall be a cherem. Now, cherem is one of the most intriguing words in the biblical Hebrew language. It means about 7 different things and has multiple translations. So we're going to have to figure out how to navigate the translation of the word cherem. You understand, cherem can mean a ban, A cherem can mean something which is devoted or sanctified. Cherem can mean excommunicated. You put somebody in cherem. Cherem can mean to destroy, lahacharim. Right? So there's lots of different definitions of the word cherem. We'll have to sort that out. But nonetheless, Yehoshua says, "Vayta ha'ir cherem, hi v'chol asher ba la'Hashem." This city is going to be a cherem to God. Rak rachava zonah tichiyeh. Of all the people there, rachava zonah has to be saved. Hi v'chol asher ita b'bayit. Ki hechba'ata et hamalachim asher shalachnu, because she hid the messengers we had sent, and so Rachav was promised that her life would be spared. But you yourselves be careful, guard yourselves from the cherem. Pen tacharimu ulekachtem min hacherem, lest you destroy yourselves, or curse yourselves, tacharimu, by violating the cherem and taking of the cherem for yourself. Samtemet machane Yisrael lecherem, and then you will make the camp of Israel accursed, or a cherem. Va'achartem oto, and you will muddy it, or dirty, or trouble it, or cause it anguish. Again, translations here are difficult because these words become central themes in the course of the story, but we'll work the best we can. You can see right here in this pasuk, in pasuk Yechet, the word cherem is used 1, 2, 3, 4 times, and in each time it's a different conjugation, translation, or meaning. So it's a fascinating word in Tanakh. We'll explore it. V'chol kesef v'zahav u'klei nechoshet u'vazel kodeshu la'Hashem. Gold, silver, brass, iron, all of the vessels that you find are kodesh la'Hashem. They are sanctified to God. Otzar Hashem yavo. They shall come into the treasury of the mikdash, mishkan, mikdash, whatever the context is. They will go to the what we call hekdesh, or Berek HaBayit, another aspect of the word cherem. So it happened that the people cried out, they blew the shofar. As these two things happened at the same time, the shofar and the cry of the people, and the wall fell beneath itself. So the people are surrounding the city. The moment the wall falls, everybody could go in. They literally just stormed the city from all sides, and they then captured the city. They, again, there's that word, right? Devoted, sanctified, destroyed. In this case, it's destroyed. Everything that was in the city. We'll talk about that phrase and the context of the notion of non-combatants in this. I think we talked about that way at the beginning of the study of Yehoshua. We'll come back to it again, just as a quick reminder at a later point. But nonetheless, the city and all of its spoils are essentially destroyed. Ad shor vasev chamor lefi charef. ולשניים האנשים המנגלים את הארץ אמר יהושע בואו בית האישה הזונה ויוציאו משם את האישה ואת כל השלה כאשר נשבעתם לה. I think we've once talked about the fact that I do not like the fact that they translate Rechava Zonah as a harlot. She was not a harlot, she was an innkeeper. The word Zonah in biblical Hebrew is a reference to Mazon, which is an innkeeper, and that's why they were at her house. I'm not sure why they resist that temptation, that translation, but nonetheless, that's the context.
How could they come to her house if her house was in the wall and the wall fell down? Then right. How did they come and get her out?
So we've talked about that. Once they made a promise to her that her house would be spared, so her house had to be spared, even though the walls fell around it. So that's part of it.
I don't say so.
No, it doesn't say so, but you have to assume that, because otherwise it would. Right, her house was literally ben achomot, so there's no other explanation except for the fact that they promised her that she would be spared, so they kept their promise. But the miracle of the walls collapsing is no less significant than the miracle of her house being spared. Right? You can collapse the walls, you can spare her house. And Nikki, I think you had a question, or somebody had a question.
That was the same sort of thing. I assumed that the proof of that is he's telling them to save her after the walls have fallen.
Correct.
You have to assume that piece of the wall didn't fall.
Correct.
But then it would say it's very strange.
Okay, but we don't have a choice, right? You have to, on the one hand, the walls fall. Her house is between the walls, and yes, it's survived. So you just have to put the two and two together. There's no.
Does it say that the walls collapsed? Does it say?
Yeah, it says ותיפול החומה תחתיה.
ותיפול החומה תחתיה. So it, I don't know.
Okay.
Maybe they didn't save her.
No, for sure they did. That's what it says. Sorry, we skipped a pasuk. ולשניים האנשים המרגלים את הארץ אמר יהושע בואו אל בית האישה הזונה והוציאו משם את האישה ואת כל השלה, remove Rachav and all of her family, as we had sworn to her, as that was the commitment to her. ויבואו הנערים המרגלים ויוציאו את רחב ואת אביה ואת אמה ואת אחיה ואת כל השלה ואת כל משפחותיה הוציאו. So they did. The נערים המרגלים, they come to Rachav, they take out her and her family, as they promised. ויניחום מחוץ למחנה ישראל, they take her and they put her somewhere safe outside of the army of Israel. As to the city of Yericho, sarfu be'esh v'chol asher ba. They burnt it, raised it to the ground, burnt it with fire. Rak ha'kesef v'yazahav u'chlei ha'nachoshet v'yabarzel. But as for the spoils, chattels, the spoils, gold, silver, iron, and brass, natnu otzar bet Hashem, they placed in the treasury of the, we call it a Beit Hashem. In this case, it's a Mishkan, but essentially the treasury of the Hekdesh. As Yehoshua had promised, he left Rachav and her household alive. And she remained as part of the household, the people of Israel. There's a Medrash Chazal that says that Yehoshua marries her, but that's, again, a Medrash that has no basis in the text other than the fact that she is kept alive. Because as a expression of thanks for the effort that she made to hide the spies of Yehoshua. Last two verses of the text. Vayashba Yehoshua ba'et hahi lemor. That is a very powerful word. Vayashba doesn't mean to take an oath. Vayashba means to cause others to take an oath. Vayashba, Yehoshua charged the people.
No, it tells look here, look there.
I saw.
Yehoshua charged the people, saying, Arur ha'ish lifnei Hashem mashiyakum uvana et ha'ir hazot et Yericho. Cursed is the one who will ever rebuild the city of Yericho. Bivchoro yasadena uvetziro yatziv dlateh. With his firstborn, meaning the loss of his firstborn, he will lay its foundations, and if he continues to rebuild it, with his youngest, he shall fix its gates. That's the curse. And then the last verse, Yeshua's fame now goes out throughout the land. After such an event, who did not know or hear about this extraordinary victory? Okay, we have much to break down. We have to get to this whole story of the Cherem, which is the central piece of the story in this text. What is the Cherem? Where does it come from? Why is it here? We're going to spend most of our study of this chapter trying to sort out what this Cherem is and why it was introduced. Before we do that, however, I want to point out an interesting observation in the way this text flows. At the very beginning, there's an instruction to Yehoshua. Vayomer Hashem al Yehoshua. Behold, I've given you Yericho and its king. This is what you will do. 6 days you will surround the city, and on the seventh day you'll go 7 times, and you'll blow the shofar 7 times with 7 kohanim, etc. Right? Hakafa style, 1 per day for 6 days, 7th day, and then on the 7th day you'll cry out, and then the walls will crumble beneath it. Yehoshua then calls over the people, but it seems that he doesn't give them all the instructions. He tells them to take the shofar and to take the 7 kohanim and to surround the city. And they do. And then he tells them not to say anything. Right? And then the next day they do it again. And he tells them. And then on the 7th day, he tells them, okay, now go 7 times, and now blow the shofar. And 7 days, 7 times. Sorry, the 7th day, 7 times. And then Yeshua gives them a hope. Now he says to them, Hariyu, cry out, because God has given them into your hands. And he tells them about the cherem, and he tells them about Rachav. So it's an interesting breakdown in terms of how this parak is structured. I took some time and I put this into a chart, and it was kind of just an intuitive sense. It comes out actually quite neatly. It kind of highlights one of the issues that I wanted to explore, that there's a kind of 3 pieces to this chapter. There's God's instructions to Yehoshua, there's the way Yehoshua instructs the people, and then there's the fulfillment of what Yehoshua instructs them. And so what I wanted to show you is this chart, which is the first page of the handout.
Can I ask you, when was Shabbat within these 7 days?
We'll get to that. That's a very famous medrash, but the Yerushalmi and the medrash will talk about exactly that question.
Thank you.
Hang on to that question. We will get to it. So what I tried to do in this chart is twofold. Number one, to see that there's 3 components. There's the instructions to Yehoshua, given by the, let's call it the Malach, but it says V'yomer Hashem, but according to most Mefarshim, the Malach is speaking. And then there's the application. In the application and the fulfillment, you have Yeshua's instructions to the people, and then you have the people's operation, right? They do what Yeshua tells them to do. But it goes back and forth. It flows between instruction 1 and the people fulfill. Then instruction 2, then the people fulfill. Then instruction 3, then the people fulfill. Meaning, Yeshua doesn't come to them, and maybe he did. Maybe that's just the way the text is presenting to us. But the text presents to us the notion, the idea that each step is guided by Yehoshua. Let me show you what I mean. Sorry, this heading keeps popping. I don't know if you see it, but this keeps annoying. I don't know how to get rid of it. But we'll start from here. Vayomer Hashem al Yeshua. So Yeshua, God gives Yeshua the following instructions about the Hakafot. But notice the key elements. Number 1, I will give you Yericho into your hands. And atati biyadcha et Yericho. Number 2, there are Hakafot, Hakef et ha'ir. 1 time per 6 days. On the 7th day, 7 shofarot yovlim before the, 7 shofars of the ram before the Aron. Each day, 7 kohanim carrying 7 shofarot. And on the 7th day, 7 hakafot. B'yom hashvi'i tasabu et sheva pamim. And on that 7th day, also, in addition to the shofarot, when the shofar blasts b'mshach b'keren hayavel, yariu kol ha'am, the people take a roll, the people will cry out. And then nafla ha'ir tachteh, the chomat ha'ir will fall beneath itself, meaning the walls will no longer be an issue. And the last step is va'alu ha'am ish negdo, the people will continue to operate. Just one second. Just want to take care of one thing. Okay. For some reason, I have to find this. This is a setting. Oh, there we go. Okay. So that's the when it comes to the by highlighting the separation between Yeshua's instructions and God's instructions, what I've done is also highlighted what seems to be additional pieces of information that do not appear in the original instruction. So, for example, Yeshua calls over the people and he tells them, Shiva Kohanim Yesu Shiva Shofrot Yovlim, 7 Kohanim carrying 7 shofars. That's here, correct? That's in Pasuk Daled. Shiva Kohanim Yesu Shiva Shofrot. Vayomer El Ha'am, he tells the people, Ivru v'sobu et ha'ir, go surround the city. That's exactly what God said, Sabotem et ha'ir. Hechalutz yavo lifnei aron Hashem. The chalutz, the first front ranks, they will go before the Kohanim and before the Aron. That's not in the original instruction. You won't find that in Psukim Bet through Dalet, through Hey. Now that's not in of itself significant. Yehoshua is applying all that God has told him, and now he's managing it. God gave him the overall instructions, and now he's managing it, so that's fine. But it's just an interesting observation that there is the role of the chalutz that is not recorded or reflected in God's instructions. In addition, when it's actually fulfilled, that's Pasuk Zayin, and then we go to Pasuk Chet. And remember, we've only at day 1. We haven't gotten to day 7. As Yehoshua said, so fine. The 7 kohanim carrying 7 shofars. They're blowing the shofar, and the Aron before them. The chalutz in front of the kohanim who are blowing the shofar. And everybody else behind. Again, more detail that we haven't had before, but that's because Yehoshua just told them where to put the chalutz. Now I need to know where the rest of the camp is going. So we go from the overall plan to the application, to the instructions, and then the details. And then we jump back to Pasuk Yud, which is more of Yehoshua speaking to the people. So this is Pasuk Tet. That's why I've charted it out the way I have, because except for this first column, these psukim flow in sequence. Eta'am tzivah Yehoshua lemor. Yehoshua first instructed the people, saying, not to speak a word, not to open their mouths. That's not in the original instruction. All the original instruction said is that on day 7, the people should shout. It doesn't say that on days 1 through 6, you have to be silent. Seems to be something Yehoshua added. Now, I understand why Yehoshua added that. Because he wants to highlight the uniqueness of day 7. So he's telling them, day 7 is going to be a combination of the people shouting and the shofar blowing and the ark in the middle. And all of that noise is going to come together to create the experience of the walls collapsing. So it's a partnership between God's role, which is the shofar, and the Aron, and the people's role, which is the shouting. But on days 1 through 6, we don't want to give the impression that we've started the battle. And part of it is also psychological against the enemy, right? The people in Yericho, they don't know when the battle is starting. They have no clue that this is a 6-day circuit, and then day 7 is going to be unique. So they just see the shofar blowing and the people surrounding the city and this hakafa once, and then everybody goes back to base camp. So for the perspective of Yericho, it adds to the heightened tension of what's happening. And that's what it says. They do this once, and then everybody went. They went back to bed. They went back to the camp.
The machane includes the women and children?
So machane in biblical terms is usually the military camp, but in this case it includes where they're encamping. But machane typically is referring to the army. The rest of the non-military people in this story are not referenced in this parak. I'm not sure where they are.
But can we draw attention to the fact that it doesn't seem, we would expect that the description would be of an army surrounding the city and an army attacking and invading into the city. But you don't have that language. You have the language of ha'am, and you have the language, all of the language seems to indicate that everybody was participating. It wasn't just a military operation. There's no indication.
I'm not convinced. I am not convinced that that's true. The Am can be the Am of the war, can be Am of the military, can be Ish Milchama. Vayal ha'am ha'ira ish negdo. Are you going to start with the ish v'isha? It gets complicated. I'm not sure that that's true. This was a military operation. I don't think anybody participated in the military operations except the army. You would have to show me some proof to that theory. I don't think that is accurate in this case. But it's not relevant really to my. But it's not really relevant to the highlight where I want to get to. But I don't.
Then the Machane was in the Gilgal. if that is true, if what you're saying, and then it wasn't all the people, which I also understood that it was all the people, the whole nation went, because that was like a miraculous thing. So it wasn't like an army operation. It was more, something that was run by Hashem.
I don't see any reference to that. All I see is the reference to v'nafla chomat yetachta ve'alu ha'am ish negdo. But at the same time, it says when they fulfill that, it says vayal ha'am ha'ira ish negdo. I don't. This was a war. This was. I don't see the reference to women and children in this story, other than the spoils of war of Yericho. But that's a different issue. I'm not convinced. Let's go on. I'm not convinced that is the case, but then let's continue from here. So Pasuk Yud Gimel Vayishiva Kohanim Nosim Shiva Shofarot. This is already day 2. So day 2 repeats exactly what happened on day 1. Vayasav Boatir Bayom Hasheni Pamachat Koyasu Shesh Yamim, and that's what they did for 6 days. Vayashivu Hamachana. Each day they went back to the camp. Vayi. This is still in the bitzua. This is still in the fulfillment and the application of it in the operation. So we haven't gotten back to Yehoshua's command. On day 7, so they get up in the morning, and they did exactly this, what they has done previously. Only this time they did it 7 times. And on the 7th time, the people blow the shofar. It's not clear they blew the shofar each time, but let's assume they did. They blew the shofar, and now Vayomer Yehoshua el ha'am hariu. Now cry out, God has given you the city. The city is cherem, the bracha v'zonah should be spared, but the rest of the city has to be destroyed, and you don't take off the cherem, and don't cause trouble for Israel, and the gold and the silver and the iron and the copper you'll bring to the mikdash, to the Otzar, Beit Hashem. That's the instructions. And then that's exactly what they did. People cried out, they blew the shofar, and as the shofar blew, the walls fell beneath themselves, and they ran into the city, captured it, they destroyed everything that was in the city. Jump back to Yehoshua. Yehoshua said to the 2 spies, you go to the house of Rachav and save Rachav, save her and her family. So they do. In other words, we went back from Pasuk Chav Aleph, the fulfillment, back to Yehoshua's command, Pasuk Chav Bet, back to the fulfillment. It's a fascinating way to write the story. Rather than like the Malach speaks to Yehoshua at the beginning, he tells him the whole story, or at least that part which is Tzav Hashem. And then we get this back and forth between Yehoshua's command and the people's fulfillment. Yeshua instructs, the people do. Yeshua instructs, the people do. Back and forth. What the highlight in yellow and green I'll explain in a minute. But there's I haven't seen any of the Mefarshim address the question of why the story is written this way. Not always the case. There are many battles in Chumash, for example, where Moshe gives Pinchas the instructions on how to go to fight Midian. Pinchas goes out to fight Midian, comes back and reports. You don't have this back and forth and back and forth. Here you have this step by step. Yeshua instructs, the people do. Yeshua instructs, the people do. And to some extent, it's a reflection, I think, of a very unique relationship between Yeshua and the people. He's there. He's amongst them. He's literally in the trenches with them, and he's instructing them step by step, and whatever he says, they do. There's a kind of loyalty there to Yeshua's command, almost to the point of unquestioned. It's not completely unquestioned, as we'll see, but there is this emphasis that Vayomer Yehoshua, Hariu, cry out, that's what they did. To the Meraglim, he says, go to the Ishaz, to the house of Rachav. That's what they did. You get this back and forth between what Yeshua instructs and what the people do. And I think that's just a fascinating reflection on the relationship between Yeshua and the people. But the other thing that it does is it highlights what I have put in blue, yellow, and green. So blue is instructions that I've highlighted that are not in the original tzav, but are less significant, meaning that they are just managerial, where to put this group, where to put that group, and to remind them that all the shouting and all the crying will happen on day 7, not on day 1. Fine. But then we have 2 pieces of information that are highlighted in what I've highlighted in yellow and in green that seem to be new information, unique. The first is, and the most important for our purposes, is the cherem. There is a ban placed on the spoils of war on the city of Yericho. And he warns them. Actually, I'm going to go back to the... Everybody see the yellow and the green that I've highlighted? There's 2 components to this additional information. One is the relation to all the pieces of the cherem, the instructions of the cherem, and the fulfillment of the cherem, right? That's exactly what I wanted to point out. There's this, Yeshua is instructing them, declare the city off limits, off bounds. It's a completely cherem city. We put the city into, whether into excommunication type of cherem or kodesh type of cherem. We'll see, it's both. Rakatem shimnu menachem, guard yourself, protect yourself, be careful not to take of the cherem, pentachrimu, lest you destroy yourselves. Ulkachtem menachem, and then you will make a cherem for all of Israel. Kol kesef zahav uklei nechoshet kodeshu l'Hashem. It's all sanctified, it's all holy to God. Why that is the case, we have to explore. But that's the instructions. And then when they go to fulfill it, vayachrimu et kol asher ba'ir me'ish v'yad isha minar v'yad zaken v'yad shov v'sev v'chamor. They kill everything that moves, almost. We'll see that we've talked about the fact that women and children who are non-combatants are not included in this description, despite the language. But nonetheless, you have this additional piece, which is Va'ir Safu Ba'esh. It burnt the city to the ground. Where is that in the cherem? You have a cherem which is Kodesh, brought to the Klei Kesef, Klei Zahav, Klei Nechoshet. Va'ir cherem. So how many different kinds of fulfillment of the cherem here is there? There is the gold and the silver and the spoils of war that go to the mikdash. There are the people that are put to death. And there is the city which is burnt to the ground. So the city was burnt and the gold and silver was brought to the mikdash. So what is the cherem here? It's almost like there's 3 different pieces to this cherem, and we're going to see that there in fact are 3 different components to this cherem that we need to understand. And then on top of it, there is this last piece, which we'll get to probably not today, which is the ban on rebuilding Yericho, which is part of that cherem. And then separate from all of that and interspersed in the middle is the instruction that as much as we've banned the city and nobody survives, and the gold and silver is taken to the mikdash, and the rest of the city is burnt to the ground, Rachav and her family have to be spared. Father, brothers, children, everybody in Rachav's family. That was a promise. So in the middle of the cherem, he highlights the exception, which is Rachav Azonat Tichye, her and her entire family, and that's exactly what they do. They burn the city, they keep Rachav alive. And so the contrast between the green and the yellow parts here is significant because they're contrasting each other. On the one hand, the city is in the cherem. On the other hand, okay, except for Rachav and her family, we've spared. So the real question here is about the cherem. What is it? Where did it come from? Why is it the case? Why is it only Yericho? Right? There's no other city in the conquest of Israel in which they placed this kind of ban on the conquest of Israel. Why only Yericho? Lots of questions to ask. Okay, there was a question that came a second ago. Somebody, I didn't see who was it. Somebody started a question.
Yeah, it's me. But that cherem of not to take anything actually was not obeyed
Well, we'll get to that's chapter 7. We have not at chapter 7 yet. We're in
No,
chapter
no, but
6.
what I'm saying, maybe this is alluding to that breakage of that with the story of
Well, the language clearly. We'll see that language in chapter 7. Let's get to chapter 7 when we get to it.
Okay, thank
As
you.
they say in Hebrew, Dayat Sarah Lashata.
Oh.
We have to. We'll get to that problem of chapter 7 in a few minutes, in a few weeks. So now I want to go back to. I want to start with the basic question. Here's the instruction. Sorry, it keeps jumping with the heading. Here is the instructions of the Malach. Nowhere in this list, in this instruction, is there any reference to cherem or a ban on Yericho. The instructions about how many times to circuit the city, how many times on the seventh day, what to do on the seventh day, the shofar, the aron, people. That's the instruction. When Yehoshua comes to day 7, he instructs them to cry out, which was the last piece of the instructions in God's command. That was Yehoshua's instructions. And immediately he goes into V'hayta ha'ir cherem. Where does this come from? Did God instruct this? And we're just missing that instruction? Did Yehoshua make it up? What's going on? So this becomes the jumping point to a major discussion here, which will reflect also on the question of why this cherem is introduced and uniquely to Yericho. So we're going to start a journey. It's going to take us a couple of weeks to get through it all, but stay with me and we're going to start. Hold on to your hats. You ready? All right. Now we'll jump into the source pages. So let's start from the first question. Did Yehoshua introduce the cherem on his own, or did God instruct him to do so? Okay, because as I said before, if I go to Pasuk Tet Zayin, Yehoshua is speaking to them, and he says, "Vayomer Yehoshua la'am, hariu, cry out, v'hayta ha'ir cherem." Let the city become a cherem, devoted, sanctified, destroyed, whatever the word means. So whose idea was it? So here we have a machloket in. Anytime you have a question like that, which is open-ended, you know that you're going to have opinions on both sides. So we're going to have to navigate it through. But Chazal seem to have had a very consistent position, which is both in Yerushalmi and in the Tanchuma. Actually, you know what? Before I do the Yerushalmi and the Tanchuma, let me show you the Radak. And the Radak says simply, I have to assume that God told Yehoshua to do this, even though, as I showed you in the text, it makes no reference to Yehoshua doing so. Actually, you know what? If you don't mind, make my life a little easier. That link I'm going to keep up there. I'm just going to open it up from my computer. It'll be easier to see. The heading keeps jumping at me. Yeah, that's easier. Okay, can everybody still see that? And now I don't have that header popping down. So the Radak says that even though God doesn't seem that God instructed Yehoshua to make this ban on Yericho, I have to assume that that is the case. Yehoshua lo amar davar kazeh milibo. Yehoshua would not have made this up. Even though the text makes no reference to such an instruction. There are many such cases where God's instructions are omitted from the story, even though they must have happened, meaning the Navi or the leader didn't make it up. He must have had it from some other context. For example, Chet Egel. In the aftermath of Chet Egel, Moshe instructs Shevet Levi to go and to kill all the perpetrators. Simu ish charbo. That instruction doesn't seem to come from God. It seems to come from Moshe. So the Meforshim will say it's not possible. Moshe would have made something like that up. And he must have had instructions. Some suggest that was true about the breaking of the tablets after Chet Egel as well. That even though there's no instruction there, maybe Moshe did that. He had that instruction. Chazal, on the other hand, did not feel that way. Amar Yeshua Deromia, Yeshua of the south, probably the same Yeshua ben Levi of the Bavli. This is in the Yerushalmi. Shlosha dvarim gazru betin shalamato ve'iskimu betin shalamali mehem. There are three places in Tanakh where we find that the Navi, the Melech, the person, the Israel, made some kind of decree, and the Bezdin Shalmala agreed to it. These are the three cases. Cherma shel Yericho, the cherem placed on Yericho, says the Medrash, is one of those three examples where Yehoshua made it up and God agreed. The second is Megillat Esther, meaning the institution of a new holiday for Megillat Esther, Kitvunu L'Dorah, to writing of the Megillah, famous story in the Gemara Megillah. And the third is Shelat Shalom B'Shem, the notion that we can greet each other by using God's name, which you find in Sefer Shoftim, Megillat Ruth, where Boaz greets his workers, B'Shem Hashem, and he says, Hashem Imachem. All right, the other two I'm not going to discuss today. They are for a different book. We're going to focus on Chemo Shel Yericho. How do I know? It's one thing to say that Yeshua made it up. Evidence that Yeshua made it up is simply in the text. It would seem that there is no right? This reference to the cherem doesn't appear in God's instructions. So that would seem to support the notion that Yeshua made it up. On the other hand, sorry about that. On the other hand, says the Gemara, how do I know that Bezdin Shalmala agreed? How do I know that the Bezdin Shalmala agreed? Says the Gemara, Cherma Shel Yericho, because the pasuk on the one hand says Chata Yisrael, Israel sinned. Israel sinned below Yeshua Kazar. Didn't Yeshua make the decree? This is very confusing. What did the Gemara just do here? I'm not quite sure I understand the question or the answer. Israel sinned, but was not Yeshua the one who decreed it? I'll show you what the Gemara means in a second. Clearly, God must have agreed to Yeshua's ban. Now, what the Gemara is doing here is a classic methodology of Midrash to quote two words of a pasuk, and for the Medrash to assume that you and I know the rest of the pasuk by heart. Because Chazal knew Tanakh by heart, they assumed we did too. I've shared that with you many times. I believe it in my heart of hearts. So what we need to do is go back to this pasuk and see what it's talking about. So let's jump for a second. This is Yehoshua Perek Vav. We're going to move to that verse that somebody a moment ago alluded to, and I said, no, we're not there yet. That's in chapter 7. So we're going to jump now to chapter 7 for a moment. In chapter 7 starts, Vayimalu b'nei Yisrael ma'al b'cherem. Israel committed a trespass. Me'ilah is a biblical prohibition called trespassing, using hektish for personal purposes in this cherem. How did Israel do so? Vayikach achan ben kami ben zavdi ben zerach l'mata Yehuda min hacherem vayicharav Hashem b'Yisrael. He violated the cherem. This achan took of something from Yericho, and God was angry. Okay, how that manifests itself, we'll see when we get to chapter 7. It's an extraordinary story. We'll get to it, and then we get to Yeshua's conversation with God. Yehoshua, the implication of this story is that the next battle they fight is the Battle of Ai, and the first campaign, the Battle of Ai, they lose. And it's the first time Israel is defeated on the battlefield ever. And Yeshua's furious. Yeshua tears his garment, and he turns to God, and he says, why did you take us out of Egypt? Why have you done the crosses over the Yarden just so that we should be destroyed by the people of the Canaanites? We'll get to Yeshua's reaction. Vayomer Hashem el Yehoshua. God says to Yehoshua, Kumlach, get up. Why are you falling on your face for? Chata Yisrael, Israel sinned. V'gam avru et briti, they violated my brit, my covenant, my contract with them. Shetziviti otam, which I commanded them. V'gam lakchu min hacherem, by taking of the cherem. V'gam ganvu, they stole. V'gam kichashu, and they hid it, meaning they denied it. V'gam sama bichlehem, they put it into their own backpacks. And therefore, because they violated the cherem, they couldn't stand before their enemies. And therefore, they turned their backs on their enemies. Because I've turned them into a cherem. I've turned them into an accursed people, right? That was that play on the word cherem. I won't be with you anymore unless tashmidu et hacherem unless you remove the cherem from amongst you. So you read these psukim, and it jumps off the page that this was by God's decree. This isn't Yehoshua. God doesn't say to Yehoshua, Israel still sinned. They violated your command. They violated your cherem. It says, they violated that which I commanded them. So on that basis, the Radak says God must have commanded Yehoshua to tell them about the cherem. On the other hand, the Medrash is adamant. No, Yehoshua made this up. Well, if Yehoshua made this up, how could God say they violated my command? To which the Gemara answers, here we see, that God agreed. And the moment God agreed, it has the stamp of authority as if it is God's command that they violated. That's the power of it. It's a similar sentiment in the Medrash Tanchuma. When they entered into the land of Israel, Yehoshua said to them, Amar lehem Yehoshua v'hayta ha'ir cherem, that the city should be a ban. We don't find any reference that Yehoshua was so commanded. El Yehoshua Matzmo, says the Medrash, Yehoshua made this up. But how do I know that God agreed, approved, accepted it? As it says, Chatai Yisrael v'gam avru v'gomer. I love the way the Medrash does that. It leaves out the most important word. It says, etc. Right. The most important word is vavu et briti. They violated my brit, which I commanded them. Clearly, God must have agreed. So it's a fascinating interplay between Yehoshua and God. There's almost this meeting of the minds, kaviyachol, this sort of understanding that even though God didn't instruct Yehoshua to make a ban on Yericho, God certainly understood that that ban was well placed. It was correct. It was the right thing to decree. And therefore, its violation had all the components of a violation of a biblical command. Even to the point of being defeated in the next war against the people of Ai. Because they were being punished for the violation of the ban which, according to Chazal, Yehoshua introduced on his own. So that just raises the stakes tenfold on why this ban was so important. Why it had to be decreed, and why once it was decreed, it was so ironclad that even the smallest violation of it sent Israel into a tailspin in terms of their status in the conquest of the story of the conquest of the land of Israel. So that raises the stakes. Now we have to understand what is the cherem, why was it decreed, and what it represents. But I want to open a parenthesis here that is just an interesting observation. According to many of the Mefarshim, I left out the actual reference here. It's in the Ramban. I left out the actual reference here, but I'll come, maybe next week I'll share it with you in the text. There is a notion based on this paradigm that Yehoshua declared a cherem, and the people, it had the status of law to the point where the moment they violated it, they were held accountable for the consequences of that violation, has ramifications up until even till this day. So there's small ramifications and there's larger ramifications. The smaller ramification is that what we're seeing here is a little bit of the paradigm of what we would call rabbinic commands, rabbinic instructions, rabbinic mitzvot. Every time we fulfill a mitzvah that was introduced by the rabbis, midrabanan, we recite a bracha. When we light Hanukkah candles, right? Hanukkah candles is a holiday completely introduced by Chazal, by the rabbis. Right? It had no, it's not a biblical holiday in any way. Yet we say a bracha when we light those candles. What's the bracha we say? Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddeshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu adlik ner Hanukkah. We have a bracha to God who commanded us to light the Hanukkah candles. Where did God command us to light the Hanukkah candles? Right? Nowhere. So all the Rishonim point to, the Gemara says this actually, that the Torah commands us to listen to the decrees of the rabbis, and therefore, by extension, the moment we accept that notion that every rabbinic mitzvah has the status behind it of a biblical mitzvah that says, listen to the rabbis. So therefore we can say, vitzivanu, can make a bracha that, even though it seems to be a contradiction. The same is true for this, tenfold. The moment Yeshua decrees, it becomes law, it becomes rule. And it becomes so ingrained, so established, that when the people violate it, they're held accountable by God. The way the technicality of it works is referred to in the Rishonim as takanata kahal. The notion that the tzibor, the community, or the elected or the appointed officials of the tzibor, of the community, can make a decree that is then binding on the entire community of Israel. And the people are held accountable for that decree. Assuming Yehoshua introduces the ban, the people accept it because Yehoshua is their leader. They've accepted him as their leader. And now it has the force of law to be enforced by God. That notion of takanat kahal, the Ramban, on the concept of cherem, links to this concept of takanat kahal, according to many, many poskim, is the foundation for all the law, the validity of the laws of the modern state of Israel. The notion that the people of Israel can elect officials who can then make laws or decrees that are binding upon the entire people is what we in political discourse is called a social contract. In halachic language is called takanat kahal. And its foundation is the concept of cherem, decreed by Yehoshua, enforced by God. Briti asher tziviti. Because Yehoshua has that authority, he's the leader of the people. And by extension, if you go to the whole concept of takanat kahal, now suddenly there's a whole arena of elected officials and representatives who come together and who can make takanot. This was true throughout history, even when we had community structures in Europe. The kahal structure. And the kahal made a decree. It was binding on all the members of the kahal. It's a fascinating subject of discussion, fascinating genre. It's enormous. And I'm just giving you I'm really just telling you it exists, not even reviewing it. I'm detailing it. I'm just telling you that it exists, and its link is to this notion that Yehoshua decrees and the people are held accountable for that decree, for better or for worse. Okay, that's the parentheses, close parentheses. We now have to explore Bezrat Hashem at the beginning of next week's shir. Why Yehoshua decreed this ban? What was its purpose? And whoever asked me about the Shabbos question before, one of the answers, I promised you an answer today, which I didn't get to, but one of the answers in the Medrash was that the seventh day was Shabbos. And because the seventh day was Shabbos, that somehow created the mandate for this ban. We'll talk about what that means, but there are other explanations as well. We're going to explore at least 3, possibly 4, completely different explanations as to why This ban was so important, it had to be decreed. Yehoshua had to do it. The people had to follow it, to the point where the consequences were that when they violated it in chapter 7, the entire people of Israel were held accountable. So we have a journey ahead of us on that road. I will stop here, and if there are any questions on so far what we've done, I'll be happy to explore them.
Declaring something and demanding from the nation to do it always has the risk that they won't, and that they're נכשלים.
Correct.
You had the story with Shaul and Yonatan, which was a personal problem.
I'm going to ask you to hold that thought and remind me next week if I don't get to it, because in my notes, literally, I have 4 different explanations for this decree. 1, 2, and number 3 is a discussion of the implication of the war of the Battle of Michmas and the oath that Shaul took, and the conversation between Shaul and Yonatan, and whether or not there's a parallel to our story. So we will come to it. B'ezrat Hashem, if I don't get to it directly, please remind me about it. It's a very interesting comparison. The language there is also very similar because it uses the expression Ocher Yisrael, which is unique to the story of the violation here in Achan. It's used there also in the context of Shaul and Yonatan. There's an oath, there's a violation of the oath. Fascinating. I think they're actually closer in intention.
But over there, the people went against it, because when he wanted to blame Yonatan and kill him, people didn't agree.
Right, there are differences too, but I want to highlight one very important parallel from which we can learn a great deal about why Yehoshua did so. So we'll talk about it.
The language here sounds like Ir Hanidachas.
Oh, we're going to get to that too. We're going to get to that too. Here are the 4 explanations that I have listed. One is the issue of Bikurim, Kedushat Haaretz. One is the issue of Ir Hanidachat. The third is the issue of the parallel to the Battle of Michmas. And the 4th is, I'll hold it as a surprise. But you are all correct. These are all part of the parallels, possible explanations of the context. You're all sort of guessing in exactly the right directions, but we will explore them B'ezrat Hashem. Next week we'll probably get to 3 of them. We'll hold the 4th for the week following. But this is really now we're getting into the heart of the Sefer.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
pleasure.
Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
My pleasure. Enjoy.
Any snow in St. Louis?
Oh, an inch or 2. Nothing significant.
Good.
Just enough to shut the city down and close all the schools. Thank you. Have a good night.